It's wonderful that we have it, and we're delighted to support it. And those of you who are new, you should try and do what you can to make it thrive even more. So my wife Judy Harris and I have sponsored this lecture series for several years now, and we have pinpointed Xavier Amador for a long time, waited for the right moment to have him come. He's here with his wife Christina, who's sitting here in the front row, a new wife and a wonderful addition to our circle and to him. Xavier is a clinical psychologist, and he'll tell you a little bit about why and how he became a clinical psychologist. He heads the Henry Amador Center on Anosognosia, and he's really the world's leading expert on anosognosia. It took Judy and me a long time to learn how to pronounce it, much less to spell it, but it is a part of the brain disease which you have no insight into the fact that you're ill. Our son Matthew had anosognosia. Hard for me to talk whenever it comes up. And we had a struggle for 10 years with somebody who's over 18 and doesn't recognize they're ill. Your ability to deal with it is limited. We cold called Xavier, who had written a book, and copies of this book will be here tomorrow for anybody who wants them, called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. And he, out of the goodness of his heart, worked with us and took us through this journey for several years. It's in part because having become a clinical psychologist and became a tenured professor at the medical school at Columbia, he left that position in 2002, I think it was, because he wanted to devote his life to helping people and helping families and others be able to communicate with those where if you tried to use rational arguments, it wasn't going to work with somebody who had a deep belief otherwise. So he has had his own journey, his own family journey in multiple ways, but also he moved on from there to head the Center for Research and Education and Practice at NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, really established much of the programming that this broad organization that's the most significant one in dealing with issues of mental illness, and has gone on to teach at the State University of New York and now at the University of Utah as well. Besides his book, I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, which is an important book. It's in 30 languages now, for anybody, not just to deal with those with anosognosia, but to deal with anybody where the normal dialogue has gone south, where you cannot communicate with people and find ways in which you can build different kinds of relationships. He also wrote another seminal book called When Someone You Love is Depressed, which takes it in an even broader direction. So today and tomorrow, he's going to help us work through a lot of what he's done, which has included a lot of work as a forensic psychologist in cases involving people who have gotten caught up in the law in different ways, and in other respects, an amazing amount of breadth, and just a wonderful human being as well. Xavier.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Norm and Judy, for all that you do. Really an honor and a privilege to be here. Yeah, Norm mentioned that I have some family experience with the problem of poor insight. The subtitle of the talk, if we can put the slide back up, is Understanding Poor Insight in Persons with Mental Illness. I'm going to focus primarily on psychosis. Does everybody know what psychosis is? Right? This is not a political argument or anything. This is hallucinations and or delusions. Then again, it might be political. All joking aside, it's a very serious brain disorder affecting around 6 million Americans plus, actually. So schizophrenia, schizoaffective, delusional disorder, bipolar disorder with psychotic symptoms. So I'm going to focus primarily on that. But much of the research I'm going to show has actually been replicated in people with substance abuse disorders and eating disorders and a couple of others. But I will be focused primarily on schizophrenia, but just know this has a broader impact and application. The first time I encountered really poor insight into a psychotic illness was in the context of my relationship with my brother. This is a picture of Henry and me. We had I'm the little guy driving the car, and Henry is looking in the window. And if you can see the picture and the smiles on our faces, that really reflected our relationship. We were very close. We were best friends, even though he was 8 years older than me. Part of that was that we arrived on the heels of the Cuban Revolution. I was born in Cuba. We all were. Our father had been killed in the revolution, fighting for democracy. And our mother landed penniless with 4 children. And she was one of the reasons I wrote When Someone You Love Is Depressed, frankly. She was very depressed. And Henry was a rock. I mean, he was my rock. Taught me how to ride a bicycle, taught me how to throw a baseball. Most importantly, he listened to me. He cared about how I felt. We were good, dear friends. Fast forward 20 years after this picture, and I'm a senior in college, State University of New York, and he's living in Tucson, Arizona with my mother and our stepfather. We called him Dad. Wonderful man that she remarried. That's how we all got our citizenship, actually, thanks to Bernie Bielefeld. My mother went from Maria Cristina Amador Sanchez Espinosa Valdez Gayol to Maria Bielefeld. So I never actually mentioned that before talking, but somehow it seems relevant. I get a call. Henry's living with my mom and my stepdad, our stepdad. And he says, "Come home quick, I killed Dad." I didn't for a second think that he had done anything to our father. It took me an hour to get him back on the phone, and when I got him back on the phone, what became readily apparent was that he was having psychotic symptoms. He had the delusion that he was playing the guitar, and the guitar music got transmitted into our stepfather's head, causing him to trip and fall while jogging. This just really bizarre, convoluted delusion. He was also hearing the voice of the devil telling him to kill himself. He was suicidal. So I flew to Arizona, and I'll never forget being in the living room with my siblings, our blended family. There were 9 kids. So Henry was holed up in his bedroom talking about killing himself because he thought he'd killed our father, our stepfather. And my siblings, one by one, pointed to me and say, "You go deal with Henry, you're the psychologist," which was absurd. I was 21 years old. I was a senior in college. The reason I think they selected me is this picture you're looking at, what it represents, which is 2 brothers who really trusted each other. So I went and I talked to them. And for 7 days, I kept saying, "You need help. You desperately need help. Come to the hospital. I need help. I'm sad. Come with me." He wouldn't do it. Much later, I learned he couldn't do it. But from my perspective back then, he just wouldn't do it. He refused to get help. He didn't see that he had any problems whatsoever. We argued for what became a gentle disagreement turned into argument for 7 days. Anyone want to guess real quickly? Just shout it out. I'll repeat it. How do you think I got him into the hospital after 7 days? Called the police, yeah. So they were fantastic, actually. This is long before we had police officers trained in crisis intervention. They really were wonderful. He gets to the hospital, gets medication, hallucinations disappear, the delusions remit. I'm thinking this is a miracle drug. It's just an antipsychotic medication. He's in the hospital for a month, which today we never have those kinds of hospitalizations. This is back in 1981. And he's sitting around a table with the doctor and the nurse, and the doctor explains, "You've got schizophrenia. You need to take this medication for the rest of your life." And Henry says, "I understand, no problem, okay." We drive home, Mom makes dinner, Henry's back in his room, still rather depressed, cleaning the dishes, and I go to throw something under the sink in the garbage can. What do you think I found in the garbage can? Yeah, how did you know that?
My sister has bipolar disorder.
Your sister has bipolar disorder. So I'm sure, I meant to start that way. Thank you for sharing that. How many of us are family caregivers of people who have had mental illness? Look around the room, folks. We're not alone. How many of us are mental health professionals? I'm raising my hand. Good. Any of us work in the criminal justice system? I have. Good. And part of the training that we do is with law enforcement, with judges, with prosecutors, with defense attorneys, because persons with serious mental illness really encounter so many facets of our society. At any rate, I find his bottle of antipsychotic medication. I knock on his door. I said, "What the heck is going on?" And he said, "I don't need it." I said, "Well, just 4 hours ago you said you needed it and you take it." And he said, "No, that was then. This is now. I'm fine." That started a 7-year period where our relationship looked like this. Henry running away from me, running away from folks like you, running away from mental health professionals, law enforcement, homeless, not working, no friendships, isolated. I don't know how he didn't pass away during those 7 years. During that time, I was learning to become a clinical psychologist, and I had a patient just like Henry. Working with her in a psychiatric unit, I left my conversation with her incredibly frustrated, went and talked with my supervisor. I'm telling him the story I'm telling all of you, and he says, "Stop talking. Just stop talking." So I stopped, and he says, "No, you don't understand. Stop talking to her. Start listening to her. Ask her what she wants." And it sounds like a simple kind of shift, but it was for a young intern, who has a clipboard and a list of questions. It was a major shift in my thinking. I went out and asked her, what did she want? And what do you suppose she wanted? To get out of the hospital. The other thing she wanted was her mother to stop calling the police. I said, "I'd like to work with you on those two goals." It went really well. She accepted medication. I worked with her and her mother in the outpatient clinic. So I had an epiphany that what I'd been doing for 7 years, represented by this picture, with my brother was completely wrong. So I called him up and I said a few things. He was still in Arizona living with our mother. I said, "I'm sorry for all the times I told you you were mentally ill. I will never do it again." I kept that promise. "And I'm sorry for all the times I told you you needed medication, you needed treatment. I will never do that again." And I kept that promise. Within 6 months of the shift in me, not him, working with his goals, he accepted a long-acting injectable antipsychotic medication, stayed on it for 20 years, had 2 volunteer jobs, went to Fountain House. I don't know if you know the clubhouse system, but it's an amazing place, a community for persons with serious mental illness. He'd go there to hang out with those mentally ill people. He never believed he had mental illness. 20 years nearly, he was on medication and in other forms of treatment. I asked him in the last year of his life, "Why are you in treatment?" First I asked him, "Do you think you have schizophrenia?" He laughed and said, "No, I don't have it." Because I never challenged him, remember. I promised I'd never tell him again he had it. So he kind of made the mistake of me thinking he didn't have it. I said, "So why are you taking these medications? Why are you taking these injections once a month?" And he said, "I do it for you." Wow. And for Mom and Pops, for 3 relationships. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, actually, an operationalized form of what happened with my brother and what happened over the course of 15 years of research. But this is what our relationship looked like. That's me with the Jerry Seinfeld haircut on the left. That's Henry on the right. And I can't look at the picture without crying, but take a good look at it. We had our relationship back. He was in recovery. He died in a car accident being a good Samaritan, being the kind, generous, loving guy that I had lost sight of during those 7 years that we fought and argued. So we hear all kinds of stories. You've heard my story. You heard Norm mention Matthew. But we unfortunately read a lot of stories of crimes rather than stories of recovery, like the one I just told you about. And this is one of them. This is Margaret Mary Ray. Anyone know who Margaret Mary Ray was? That's really sad, because many of you know her as David Letterman's stalker. Did you hear of that? She had the delusion she was married to David Letterman. She would go to his home, he'd come home, she'd be there, he'd call the police. She had time in police cars, she had time in court, she had time on probation, she never received treatment. She ultimately died from her illness, and what do you think I'm referring to? Suicide, yeah. I asked that question for a very specific reason. I'm going to get up on a soapbox for a moment. When I look at the research on the brain dysfunction in people with mental illness who suffer from suicidal ideation and suicidal behaviors, attempts, I don't believe people make a knowing and voluntary choice to end their lives. People die from suicide like they die from heart disease or cancer. The mortality rate by suicide in the disorders that I'm talking about this afternoon runs about 1 out of 10 to 15%. So these are very life-threatening illnesses. And there are other causes of early death that are associated with untreated mental illness, the ones I'm talking about right now. So I have a question for you all. Denial impairs common sense judgment, doesn't it? About the need for treatment and services. Everybody agree with that? Okay. I completely disagree. If I take the perspective of Henry, right, or I hope it's okay I mentioned Matthew. If I take Matthew's perspective, Margaret Mary Ray's perspective, millions of Americans with these illnesses who do not believe they're ill, from their perspective, it's common sense to refuse treatment. It's crazy to accept it. These are powerful psychiatric medications. Let me ask you a question to bring this home. Raise your hand if you'd inject yourself with insulin, knowing you do not have diabetes. Raise your hand. Why is nobody raising their hands? Why not? Why wouldn't you? Anyone? You don't need it. That's the number one reason. It could hurt you. It could even kill you. I've heard that from many patients I've worked with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, etc. I don't want this antipsychotic medication. I don't need it. It could kill me. It could hurt me. But are we dealing with denial? Norm's already tipped my hand. What we're dealing with more often than not is anosognosia. This was first described by the Hungarian neurologist Babinski. If you're familiar with the Babinski reflex in newborns, it's the same neurologist. And he was working with Charcot in France. Charcot was Freud's mentor. And he described people with paralysis, for example, on one side of their body, neurological patients who did not know they were paralyzed. I actually have evaluated someone like that. It's a remarkable thing. To be paralyzed and not know it. Try to get out of bed. Have to be restrained in wheelchairs. I'm going to just quickly review some of that research. And then I'm going to talk just for a moment about, kind of what the field's general knowledge or lack of knowledge is about anosognosia. And then I'm going to do a role play with all of you. So I'm just giving you a preview of what we're going to do for the next 40 minutes or so. Okay? And then we'll have time for discussion. But, Norm made the joke. It took me a while to learn how to pronounce this. I'm terrible at phonetic spellings. They don't help me in the dictionary, and maybe it's because English is my second language. Yes?
Oh, I have trouble a little bit with hearing. Could you speak into the
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'll stay closer to the mic. I have a hard time staying behind podiums, so maybe I can move it. All right. This is a trick that I use to learn how to say it. And I want you to... Anne is a very nosy woman who somehow knows eggs. I don't know what that means. So on a count of 3, would you say it with me? 1, 2, 3. Anosognosia. Thank you. I'll tell you why I wanted you to do that. If you come away from this talk, from this time together, thinking this is a symptom that's important to communicate about, you need to know how to say it. And it's a tongue twister. I wish it wasn't. This is a study looking at the frontal lobes of neurological patients, because the classic descriptions, those of you who may be physicians in the room, of anosognosia is posterior part of the brain, temporal parietal region. So my colleagues and I at Columbia University and Hillside Hospital in Queens looked at neurological patients with damage to different parts of the brain to see if the frontal lobes also produce this unawareness of neurological deficits. So this is just a quick example. We asked, this is a standard part of a common neuropsychological test battery. We asked this patient with prefrontal and frontal lobe lesions in his brain, right? Frontal lobe lesions. Scale of 1 to 7, 7 being perfect copy, 1 being terrible copy. How do you think you'll do? He said 7. Most of us would say 6 or 7, right? You could draw this clock. This is what he drew. Did he have a problem? Right? Obviously. I then asked him, thank you. I then asked him, how did you do on a scale of 1 to 7? He said 7. So when faced with evidence that he had a construction apraxia, a neurological symptom, he still could not see that he had a neurological symptom. I then pointed to the 12 inside the rough circle. I asked him what number that was. He said 12. And then I started pointing to the 4 12s outside the circle. By the time I got to the 4th one, He flushed, got angry, pushed the paper away, and said, "That's not my drawing." Yeah. So he did not learn. Trying to educate him that he had this neurological symptom didn't work. Instead, I got a confabulation. What are confabulations? Basically, our brain is making up a story. It's a reflex to fill in gaps in memory or perceptions. So let me just briefly, very briefly, cover some research on anosognosia. It's focused primarily on schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but also other psychotic disorders. In 1991, I can't believe it's that long ago, my colleagues and I at the Schizophrenia Research Center at Columbia University in New York published this review article. I knew this was a big problem because of what I'd encountered with my brother and with my patients. And it turned out there were only about a dozen studies in the research literature. What did those studies show? That a huge number, some of the studies were saying 80, even 90% of patients with schizophrenia did not believe they had mental illness. One of the investigators, Will Carpenter, from the Maryland Psychiatric Center, even argued, together with John Carpenter from Yale, I'm just going down memory lane here, that poor insight should be part of the diagnostic criteria. I don't think it should be, but it was very common. One other study found that it tends to stay stable over time. But what we were wondering about, my colleagues and I, is what about the frontal lobes of the brain? Because we knew at this time, in 1991, that the frontal lobes of the brain in people with schizophrenia and associated psychotic disorders was not functioning properly. There was hypofrontality, there were other abnormalities in brain function. So we had a hypothesis that frontal lobe deficits would predict poor insight. That would predict the person who says, I'm not sick, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need help. People immediately went out to test this. These are neuropsychological studies finding moderate to strong correlations. If I'd listed all of the studies, there'd be 4 more slides. So this is just the first 15 years or so of studies. In behavioral research, finding moderate to strong correlations is pretty unusual. So what does that mean? The way the brain is working when the frontal lobes are not working properly, there's hypofrontality. It's predicting who has deficits in awareness of their illness. But what about the way the brain looks, right? That's how it's working. How about the way it looks? This is evidence from 20 studies looking at postmortem brains as well as brain imaging studies. All found significant differences between subjects with schizophrenia who knew they had schizophrenia compared to those who did not know. And all the brain regions tended to be in the prefrontal and frontal cortex. So again, the hypothesis that we had published was getting confirmed very quickly. 3 of the studies found that even when not treated with medication, first episode, so we're talking late teens, early 20s, the subjects in the study, they still found these brain differences. So it starts early on. It's right at the onset of illness, and the brain differences are not caused by medications, obviously. One more study. This is part of the DSM-4. Do you all know what the DSM is? Anyone not know? Okay, it's the diagnostic manual that all mental health professionals use, and we use in forensic psychiatry and psychology. Don't ask me about the name because I have no idea why they named it what they named it. It makes no sense. But it's our authoritative manual on psychiatric diagnosis. So I was site coordinator. We had 5 sites around the country, and I'm just showing you the results from the schizophrenia sample. This is 221 people with schizophrenia. We found that 60% roughly were moderately to severely unaware of having a diagnosis. What was interesting to us is, were they also unaware of signs and symptoms of the illness? And we found between 40 and 57% were unaware that they had the signs and symptoms that make up the diagnosis of the disorder. So just like the frontal lobe patient with the clock that I showed you, he didn't recognize that symptom. What we found is in schizophrenia and related disorders, it wasn't just unawareness of a stigmatizing diagnosis, it was also unawareness of the signs and the symptoms that make up that diagnosis and other symptoms that are associated with it. So lots of deficits in awareness. So when the DSM-4 was revised, I was co-chair with Dr. Michael Flaum, and we were asked by the American Psychiatric Association to impanel really almost like a journal, a peer review of the scientific literature, right? So we had folks from the U.S., not folks, we had scientists from the U.S. and internationally review all the research. And what did we, as a group, come up with in terms of what the scientific consensus was back in 2000? That a majority of people with schizophrenia have poor insight. Evidence suggests that it is a manifestation of the illness. Now, when I was early in training, I was told that what I was seeing in my brother was denial. We have known for, the field has known for at least 25 years now that this is a manifestation of the illness, not a coping strategy, not denial. It is comparable to what we see in neurological deficits following stroke, termed, you want to humor me? What's it termed? Thank you, nice job. It's a symptom. It's not denial. Predicts non-compliance with treatment, big surprise, right? It predicts higher relapse rates, more involuntary hospitalizations, poor psychosocial functioning, poor course of illness. And although it's not in the DSM, I can tell you there's a lot of research. It also predicts criminalization of persons with serious mental illness, this lack of awareness, this anosognosia. Well, that was 25 years ago. What about today? What about the DSM that we're using today? Unawareness of illness is typically a symptom. It is comparable to what we see in neurological disorders following all kinds of brain damage, termed anosognosia. It includes unawareness of symptoms, that one slide I showed you. By the way, when I show you research, let me be clear. I'm showing you examples of studies that have been replicated numerous times since their publication. I'm not showing you just one study. So unawareness of symptoms, and it may be present through the entire course of the illness. So it tends to stay stable over time. Remember my brother? He never believed he had schizophrenia, ever. But he was in treatment for nearly 2 decades. It's also common in schizoaffective disorder. We know it's common now in other psychotic disorders like bipolar. And it's the most common predictor of who's going to refuse treatment or drop out of treatment. It's the most common predictor, top predictor. Not a surprise. Do you really need to do research to figure this one out, right? If you don't think you're ill, you're not gonna take the pill or the injection. One addition to the list that was in the DSM-4 is that also predicts aggression. Now this is verbal aggression. And this makes a lot of sense to me, having talked with thousands of people with anosognosia for their mental illness. Everybody around that person is telling them they're ill, and they know they're not. Everybody around them tells them they need to take powerful psychiatric medications, and that's the last thing they want to do. So what happens? That person starts to get pissed off, right? Starts to get angry and becomes verbally aggressive. So I'm not surprised by that research. The jury is still out about whether there's an increase in violence. It's not clear, although we do know that untreated psychosis, there is a higher risk of violence in general. So awareness of illness and treatment acceptance. Well, as I just told you, awareness of being ill, typically called insight. Don't like that word because it suggests the person could gain insight. Awareness of being ill is the top predictor of long-term medication adherence. What do you think the other top predictor is? Support. I've kind of given you a hint, haven't I, with my story? Support. This summary comes from a review of about 47 articles on the Therapeutic Alliance. So it's a very particular kind of relationship. It can be with a family member, it can be with a police officer, it can be with a judge, it can be with a doctor, a social worker. The person listens to you without judgment. So when I talk about the CIA conspiracy or the alien transmitter in my brain, the person listens without judgment. Well, what does that look like? The person has to listen actively. They have to say, so what you're telling me is your problem is the CIA conspiracy. You don't have a mental illness, is that right? You have to actively listen to the person when they say things that we think are delusional or reflect anosognosia. And be respectful of that person's point of view. So make empathic comments like, well, I can see, given what you've told me, why you don't want to take medication. You know, if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't take medication either. That's what I'll be teaching tomorrow, just to scare you a little bit. It's a very counterintuitive approach, but it's all about embracing the experience of the person with anosognosia, who are among the loneliest people I've ever met, because everyone around them doesn't understand what's most important to them. And the third quality is, the person would like to see you try treatment. Notice the language. It isn't, I think you need treatment. I think you'd benefit from treatment is, I'd like to see you try it. And I'm going to talk about this at length tomorrow. So what do we know? Let me summarize that little bit about anosognosia for illness and acceptance of treatment. We do not win on the strength of our argument. The evidence doesn't convince the person. It just pushes them away from us. We win on the strength of our relationship. Non-judgmental, respectful communication. So to summarize, anosognosia into having a serious mental illness is a neurocognitive symptom. It is not denial. It tends to be stable in most patients. Some people do develop awareness, but in most it tends to be stable, even when successful treatment has occurred, like in the case of my brother Henry. It is the top predictor of treatment refusal and dropouts. Predicts all kinds of negative outcomes, and it's a huge barrier to creating a working alliance. I'm ahead of schedule. This is good. We're going to have time to talk.
I think you had a question.
I had a question? Yeah.
Do you have a question in the front? You can go ahead, but I'm asking at the end.
Okay. So when, talking about this symptom, if you are going to talk about it, how you talk about it really matters because it impacts how you think about it and certainly what you're conveying to the person you're speaking with. So I would encourage you to not say things like, she doesn't accept she has an illness, or he refuses to acknowledge. Anybody here, raise your hand if you would say that somebody refuses to stop hallucinating. Anyone? Why not? Because they can't. It's the same thing with anosognosia. Nobody's refusing to acknowledge or denying or not admitting or won't admit, right? As if they really know and it's something that they just won't admit to. It's a deficit. It's not a decision. It's not a voluntary choice or refuses to admit. So, what's a simple way of talking about this? Well, using language that reflects that this is a symptom, this is a deficit. Saying things like can't comprehend. My loved one can't comprehend he has an illness, or she's unaware that she has an illness. It's unable to see or understand. This kind of language really reflects the nature of this problem. Ideally, even though it's a tongue twister, has anosognosia for mental illness. So what does it feel like to have this symptom? I need a volunteer. You can sit where you are. And what I'm asking for is somebody who's not seen me do this role play, because it is online, and somebody who's married or living with their partner and currently working. You're willing? Yeah? Fantastic. Can I give you a microphone? What's your first name?
Suzanne.
So your name is Suzanne, and the first name of your partner?
Thad.
What is it?
Thad.
Thad?
Thad.
Okay. And I just want to write this down because I'm a little uncomfortable doing this, and I want to apologize to you and to the group. This is not the approach I'm teaching tomorrow. The first name of your supervisor at work, I've forgotten.
I don't have a supervisor.
You don't, but you are working for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. I got confused about it because I was asked actually to help a couple of people, and you were one of the people. I was going to choose you if you didn't volunteer. Is Thad here?
No, he's at another lecture.
Yeah, I know. And the reason for that, and I'm sorry to do this in front of a group of people, and we're going to try to do this quickly, is you're not, in fact, married to Thad. Thad is married. Do you believe you have children with Thad?
I do.
Yeah, how many?
4.
4, right? Thad and his wife, Susan, do have 4 children.
Correct.
And Thad, no, Susan.
Oh, Susan, not Suzanne.
Yeah, not Suzanne. It's a different person. That might be part of your confusion. I don't know. But this is awkward, and again, not something I typically do. But because of the nature of this talk, because of the nature of this community here, I was asked to try to help you. So the good news, and maybe you're not going to see this as good news, is I've arranged for an ambulance outside to take you to Buffalo to get psychiatrically evaluated. Would you be willing to do that?
No,
Why not?
because I don't think I think I am married to Thad and have 4 children.
Okay.
And
So when this talk is over, where are you going to go?
back to the house.
Back to the house here,
Mhm.
where Thad lives with his wife and 4 children. And you know what's going to happen when you get there? He's going to call the police, and they're going to arrest you. And you are going to be brought to Buffalo, and you're going to be in front of a judge. I'll be the judge. Ma'am, I'm sorry to see you here. I have in front of me a number of restraining orders from this gentleman and his wife and his 4 children. And I understand you once again violated that restraining order. Now I'm going to give you a choice. We can go to trial on criminal trespassing in violation of a restraining order, or we can go to treatment. You can go to treatment. We have a pretrial detention program. Sorry, that's my son calling me. Could you hear that?
I don't think you really have a son.
I had, all the years of doing this, I had that comment, didn't I? Look, I'm sure it's, sure you want to joke about this, but this is real serious. And my question for you is, would you be willing to go and speak with a psychiatrist in Buffalo?
Sure.
You would?
Mhm.
Really?
I've always wanted to go speak with a psychiatrist.
Okay. So let's not laugh, folks, because this is actually pretty serious. Let's not laugh, please. So, all right, so you go in an ambulance. I mean, you're going to be strapped down on a gurney and go in
It's
an
better
ambulance.
than going for the
The trial. Okay, good. Okay, that's a good choice. So the psychiatrist interviews you and tells you what I'm telling you. She says you've got a delusional disorder about Thad and his wife, his kids rather. You don't even believe he has a wife. You believe you're his wife. And wants to admit you to the psychiatric unit upstairs. Do you go?
No.
No, you refuse. So here's what the psychiatrist says to you. Suzanne, you're not a danger to yourself or anybody else, so I can't hold you here against your will. We're going to let you go against medical advice if that's really what you want to do. Is that what you want to do?
Yes.
Okay. So you're out in front of the hospital on the sidewalk. You got your cell phone with you. What do you do? Who do you call?
Thad.
You call Thad. What happens when she calls Thad? He calls the police. And the police come and pick you up. And you're brought back to jail. You're booked again. You're back in front of the judge. I'm the judge again. I'm really sorry to see you here again, ma'am. Now I'm going to give you another choice. We have a pretrial diversion program for persons like yourself suffering with mental health conditions. We'd like you to get some help. We can go to trial if you insist, but I really don't recommend it. What would you like to do?
Yikes. I can't imagine going through that.
Well, ma'am, you got to make a decision. I've got a full docket. Put the microphone closer.
What are my choices?
We can go to trial, or you can go to treatment again and stay this time and get treated.
I'd go to trial.
Okay. So you go to trial, you're found guilty, but you're put on probation. And one of the aspects of your probation, one of the requirements is that you are in psychiatric treatment. Okay. When you leave the courthouse, where do you go?
I'd call my sister this time.
Okay. And your sister says to you, please go get help. The family is just devastated. We're all so worried about you. And she says, please go get help. And she ends the phone call. What do you do next?
Yikes. I'd probably run away,
Okay,
but I guess you can't because they'll find you.
yeah. You try to text your kids or Thad or
Yeah,
call
but
them?
they'll do the same thing, I
Right.
guess.
So this goes on for a year.
Yeah.
You can't contact them without being picked up by the police and back in the court system and back in the psychiatric treatment system. Do you think after a year you'd finally understand you were never married to Thad, you don't have 4 children?
No,
How about 10 years?
no.
That's what anosognosia is like.
Golly.
The belief is unshakable, right? Can I ask you one more question?
Mm-hmm.
As you imagine this happening, did you have any feelings? Like-
It's so frustrating. It's almost claustrophobic. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just, your heart's palpitating and you're just thinking, this can't be me, this can't be happening to me.
Right? And this is just a role play. So
Right.
your heart was palpitating, so anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and fear. As you imagine not seeing your husband and your kids, these people you believe you're certain are your husband and your kids for 10 years, how might you feel?
I cannot, it's like your life is not your life.
Mhm. Depressed?
Mm-hmm.
Isolated? Why would he be doing this to you? What ideas might you have
I
about
guess he met
that?
Susan.
Right? But maybe some paranoid ideas,
Yeah.
right? So anxious, lonely, depressed, maybe some suspicion. How about angry?
Yeah, very angry,
Yeah.
frustrated.
Yeah, I'm just trying to help you too. You're angry at me?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Thank you so much. Can we thank her for... When you see Thad, would you give him a hug and say hello from me? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's a really lonely place to be.
And they had the same response to
Yeah.
getting help.
Well, thank you for volunteering. I can have the slides for a moment. We're gonna. So when helping somebody with anosognosia for mental illness, education and interventions do not work. I mean, this was just a role play with Suzanne, but even in the role play, we saw that it's not changing anything for her. We can't expect. Were you grateful for my diagnosis, or receptive, or acceptance of help or treatment? I mean, she did it. She accepted, some treatment or assessment because she was coerced into it by the court system, right? What we can expect. I got some of the feelings up there already: frustration, anger, hostility, fear, that palpitating heart. Suspicion, loneliness, depression, isolation, suicidal thoughts too. I've heard from many people I've worked with the symptom, and refusal to get help or treatment. So I'm going to end there, and again, thank you, Suzanne, and I'm sorry about your two. We do have, before I take any questions, I do want to say that we have donated, I think it's 40 books or so, that talk about anosognosia and the approach, the LEAP approach, and they'll be here tomorrow. So I'm trying to tease you to come to the talk tomorrow. No, I'm not really. I'm not sure exactly where they'll be, but it was a donation to the Everett Jewish Life Center, so that will be here.
If
So
you want to take questions, I can put the microphone over there. People
Thank
can
you.
go to the microphone to ask questions. That way people outside.
okay. Oh, the books are free. Yeah, no, you're not buying them.
If you have a question, come up here and ask into the microphone so that everybody outside.
Sure. Suzanne gets to ask as many questions as she wants, by the way. So I'll repeat her question. Go ahead.
Like when your brother's on medication, does he feel better and does that
Yes.
then make him want to continue because he's better or he doesn't realize it?
My brother, the question was, when my brother was on medication, did he feel better? He did feel better because when he was psychotic, when he had hallucinations and delusions, he was really depressed because he had a lot of nihilistic delusions. And the voice of the devil, and so he felt less depressed, but he never attributed it to the medication, ever. It had nothing to do with the medication. As far as he was concerned, the medication did nothing but put some well, I gave him $5 a day. That's what he asked for. I put $5 a day in his pocket. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much for that. I'm not sure I can do this without crying, but I'll try. What's the relationship between this condition and Parkinson's? And are you seeing any etiology in relationship to lifestyle choices such as diet, sleep deprivation, exercise, anything like that?
The first question, there's a lot of research on it. We do see anosognosia with Parkinson's dementia. It doesn't always appear, but it often does.
Is it related to medication, or is it's a brain dysfunction?
No, it's part of the neurodevelopmental disorder. It's part of the disorder itself, and it has to do with the brain regions that are affected. Yeah.
And how about the second?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
So you say they can't, it's not that they won't, that they can't. And their lifestyle choices,
yes.
such as what they're eating, drinking, breathing, and sleeping or not.
It's a great question, because I only showed you, I think, 6 symptoms in that one slide. We have a scale which has 72 symptoms on it, including things like health choices and things. So we'll look at somebody who's has malnutrition, poor diet, and we ask them if they recognize that. Patients with eating disorders, that again, same issues. And you see deficits in awareness of those things. So long story short is we do see anosognosia for those kinds of lifestyle decisions.
And can it improve with change in lifestyle?
In some people, it does improve. And it varies depending on the disorder that we're talking about. So I can talk best about schizophrenia. We're talking about 10%, 8 to 10%. You see improvement over time. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Can you speak about, in general, the correlation between anosognosia and ADHD in general, and specifically in the case of someone who demonstrates at least 6 of the symptoms of ADHD covered in DSM-5 and yet refuses to accept that they have ADHD? And the follow-up question is, if that's the situation, what is your recommendation for someone being evaluated for treatment?
I know that colleagues are doing research with ADHD and anosognosia, so I'm not sure that the person you're talking about may not be refusing. He or she just may not be aware that they have this problem.
So I'm going to be very clear that the person that I'm talking about may not be aware that they have ADHD, even though they are demonstrating to someone who's capable of evaluating it that they're demonstrating at least 6 of the symptoms.
Yeah.
You're saying that they just may not be aware.
Yes. Yeah, and remember the example I gave you of the man with the clock? I mean, it's a very bizarre phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, I evaluated somebody who was paralyzed and he didn't know it, and I couldn't prove it to him. So I don't know for sure, obviously, in your situation, but theoretically, absolutely that's possible, and I do know that my colleagues who do research in that area are looking at anosognosia for ADHD.
I guess my only final question is, if you thought that there was a possibility, what would be the most effective way to suggest to someone perhaps you should evaluate it, that you may be just not aware that you have the disorder?
Come tomorrow.
No, come tomorrow.
Come tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow, no, it's my best answer. I'll be giving it a full hour.
All right, thank you. I'm trying to get these guys. If anosognosia was first described way back in the early 1900s, why is it taking so long to get to the idea that you need to work with the person in a different way than to just be dogmatic and say you have it?
Right. Well, this is why I resigned from a tenured position. I was also director of psychology because of the gap between science and practice. The first gold standard, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of lithium was in a peer-reviewed journal for 22 years before it was FDA approved in our country for the treatment of bipolar disorder. There's a natural gap between science and practice. Now, you're talking about a 100-year gap, but that was on neurological patients. Right now, the gap that we're looking at is about a 30-year, 25-year gap. And we're getting there. We're getting there through our nonprofit. We're getting there through our institute. And other people are engaged in educating the field. We got the American Psychiatric Association to get it into the DSM. We're working with the WHO to get it in the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases. By it, I mean a diagnosis of anosognosia in the context of these other psychiatric illnesses. So it's an effort, it's a job, it's dissemination. You know, when double-blind placebo-controlled studies are done of psychiatric medications, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry behind the dissemination of that information. We don't have that. So it's not a complaint, it's just a reality that we have to work harder.
So from what you're saying, anosognosia won't only handle schizophrenia, but you think it's going to be used as a catch-all
Yes.
for other
Yes.
treatments, other psychotic?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we're going to see it. Look, my prediction is in the next 20 years, we will see it in the ICD first and then the DSM as formal diagnostic criteria. And I think we're going to see it in eating disorders, OCD, we're almost there, obsessive compulsive disorder, and other disorders where brain dysfunction has already been identified.
Thank you.
Sure. Just come up to the microphone. Yeah.
What is the legal reason why parents can't apply to the court to have a guardian appointed so that they can deal with the situation?
Right.
Is there against the civil rights? What's the legal reason you don't have a remedy for this?
Norm, do you want to take that question? Or Judy, come here.
I don't want to stand up, but I am standing up. So first of all, in most states, or at least many states, a guardian cannot order mental health treatment. They can do financial, they can do physical, medical treatment, but it's very seldom that a guardianship in a state will allow you to do it. But also the biggest problem, and I've worked a lot on this over the past 10 years, is that the standards in a state for getting court-ordered treatment are impossible to satisfy. They truly are so hard. You have to, in most states, it has to be that you are an imminent danger to yourself or others. And the way that's been interpreted is you actually have to have a gun to your head or somebody else's head. It's almost impossible. I'll tell you a very quick little story about that, which is that our son, Matthew, had an amazing, I mean, what you're going to talk about tomorrow and the need to build a relationship is the entire ballgame. I mean, you have to be Ann Sullivan to Helen Keller to really get the trust of somebody who has anosognosia. So Norm found a doctor for our son who worked at NIMH during the daytime, and he would take two patients. He would work all day, he would go home and have dinner with his family, and he would take two patients that he would come to their house at night. Often these folks have their nights and days switched, so they might sleep all day and be up all night. And our son had that problem. He had his days and nights switched. This doctor would come up to talk to Matthew. He'd go up to his bedroom. Matthew would say, "No, I don't want to see him, send him home, you know." But he treated Matthew with such respect and never patronized him in any way. And he brought books with him to study, books about how the brain operated, books of philosophy, books of building a relationship. And I know Norm, and Norm wants me to shut up. Do you guys want me to shut up?
There's 5 minutes left for Avi.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you the story tomorrow, but I'll tell you the story separately. But bottom line was, the doctor was murdered by somebody else's patient, and they could not get a court order keeping the young man who had committed the murder.
What efforts are being made to change the laws in these states?
A lot of efforts. The Treatment Advocacy Center
Very hard on it.
and advocates like Judy Harris are working very hard to change it. It's a travesty. I mean, really, we as family members.
Between the civil libertarians and the people who have.
But I think it's also a backlash from years ago.
Oh, yeah.
People who commit-
From what happened in the 50s.
Husband could
Yeah.
commit their wife.
What Suzanne was just saying, it's a backlash from what it was like in the 50s. We have another question here.
Hi, first, thank you. I work with adult learners in the criminal justice system, and this was super helpful, so thank you.
You're welcome.
But my question is this symptom being discussed amongst scholars and researchers who study narcissistic personality
Oh,
disorder?
yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
could you explain a little bit about that problem,
Well,
how it
the-
differs from something like schizophrenia?
I've heard from so many colleagues who are working in the personality disorders arena. It's also in bipolar disorder, I'm hearing, but mostly from narcissistic personality disorder researchers. There's a lot of interest in this. The jury is still out in terms of the research. And they're primarily neuropsychological test studies. That first slide that I had up is what's been being looked at. And I'm not aware of any brain imaging studies. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
I just have, no, this isn't going to be a difficult
Oh,
question.
he stopped me this morning and basically said, how do you know mental illness really exists?
Well, I was going to
I had
ask you
not
if
had-
you
and I had
think
not
they
had-
exist or if you're under a delusion.
I had no coffee yet. Anyway, now I've had
Anyway,
coffee.
here's
I'm
one
ready.
question.
I'm ready for you. Go ahead.
So the question is, when your brother tossed out his medication, it used to be, I don't know if it's still the case, that you couldn't just go down to the drugstore and say, we've got this prescription, can you refill it? Because it was a sort of a controlled substance. Is that still the case? Like if they lose their medication or they toss it, then you're going to have to move heaven and earth to get some of it?
You need a new prescription. Yeah.
Can you get a new prescription if you just had a prescription? That was the problem. Like you had to wait
Well, most
90
insurance
days.
companies won't allow that, in my experience.
And what, well, okay, all right.
So
I
that's a
mean, in
problem.
my experience, it seemed like it was a state regulation or a federal regulation.
No.
But I don't know.
No, it's an insurance. It's an insurance issue. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You can pay for it out of pocket.
Yeah, if it's lithium, it's just a few bucks, right? Anyway, the other question is that, you mentioned people going to treatment. Normally, is it possible to get somebody some helpful treatment, inpatient treatment, within a few days, or does it normally take several weeks? And maybe there's no normal, but anyway.
The big problem is that we don't have beds. We do not have hospital beds like we used to. So I've seen people wait weeks and even months when they're voluntary patients. Voluntary. And we were talking oftentimes about involuntary admissions. And the bar that Judy was talking about is very, very high. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. We're good.
Is there a relationship between the onset and perceived trauma of any kind?
I'm not aware of research on so for example, age of onset being earlier if there's trauma. I can tell you in my clinical practice and anecdotally, trying to decide if I want to share something or not. I think I can. I have a son, an adopted son, who has schizophrenia. And he had a lot of trauma, and his onset was 11 years old. Really unusual. And I've seen other psychotic symptoms in another one of my children, although that child did not develop schizophrenia. So we do know that psychotic symptoms can emerge with severe childhood trauma. I'm not aware of any research, but I can tell you.
Adult trauma?
Leading to a difference in the age of onset, there is an association between trauma in adulthood and the onset of the first episode, yes, it's considered a triggering episode. So the person already had the vulnerability to developing the illness, the schizophrenia in this case, but there's a triggering episode. So in Henry's case, it was our stepfather's death, because he had not been evidencing psychotic symptoms until, and we were in close touch. There was nothing. It wasn't until the trauma of our father's death. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not causal, though. It's triggering. Oh, COVID in that context, I think that's why we're seeing such a rise in the incidence, because it's very traumatic, very isolating for so many people. So if you have the genetic or the biological vulnerability for schizophrenia or related illness, and then you are isolated and sequestered, I'm not surprised that we're seeing a higher prevalence of onset.
Thank you so much for the fascinating talk. I look forward to tomorrow to help me with my 25-year-old child. So I have a 25-year-old child who has bipolar, anxiety, depression, and at 19 announced that they were transgender. And peaked in 11th grade, was in gifted programs and everything, dropped out of college, moved to Canada with, I believe, a megalomaniac partner. And they come back here, once every year, every other year. And every time they come back, I'm just like, what can I do to help? So I hope tomorrow I can learn some techniques. But my question is more about my 24-year-old child who is on the autism spectrum, who doesn't understand why I let my child and their partner continue to stay with us. And do you have any suggestions for, I as a mom cannot tell them, no, you have to stay at a hotel. I want them with me because I want to see what I can do to try to help them, or at least
And with
to know
your,
that
with
they're
your child
loved.
on the spectrum, sorry to talk over you, but with your child on the spectrum, can you respect and not judge their anger about your letting your other child stay home?
I can respect, but it's
Not agree.
Like the prodigal son, they
Right.
feel like I'm here with you, I live with you, I do everything you say, and now you're letting them come back here when they
Right.
have denied you and they don't answer your calls.
So what
or
you're
your
saying to me, I'm
texts.
going to role play you for a second.
Okay.
So what you're saying to me is, after all that you do and that you're living here, I'm letting him come back when he's been nothing but, trouble for you, and you should let him back. I can see why you're upset with me. I would be upset with me too. And then maybe the question will be, well, then don't let him come. Then I would apologize. Look, I'm really sorry, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a big mistake, but I can't, as a mother, say no. I hope you can forgive me. So the 2 steps. It's absorbing through reflective listening and making empathic. And then the second step is making an empathic appeal for forgiveness and a statement of your own fallibility. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not getting way ahead of myself. This is tomorrow.
Okay.
But those are elements of the technique. But it's really about absorbing I forget if it was a son or a daughter, the one on the spectrum.
It's the son on the spectrum.
The son on the spectrum. But absorbing his experience and respecting it and letting him know you respect it. And then you stand your ground, but softly. I could be wrong. Maybe this is a terrible mistake. You're right. I shouldn't let him come home. But I'm going to. I'm a mother. I hope he'll, forgive me, support me, understand me.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Maybe this is for tomorrow as well, but in the example of Suzanne and Thad, if you're working with Suzanne's objectives or goals and her unshakable belief is that she's married to Thad
Right.
and has 4 children, wouldn't her goal be to get back with Thad and her 4 children?
Yes, it would.
More than anything.
And we're never, it's a great question, and we're never going to agree on that, unfortunately, because there's nothing I can do, because I'm living in a separate reality. But
Right.
what we can agree on, the program I'm teaching tomorrow is called LEAP. There's 7 tools. One of them is A for, in the LEAP acronym, which is look for areas where you can agree. So I'm going to try to look for areas where we can agree. Imagining this scenario, Suzanne, could we agree it would be great if you could stay out of police cars and jail and judges' courtrooms? She's saying yes. So we'd work on that, staying out of the hospital. Yeah. Are we going to be able to agree on her having contact with that? There's nothing I can do about that. I wish there was. That's how I would work with her if I were her probation officer or her therapist. We teach POs, this program as well. I wish there was something I could do to help you have contact with Thad and the children. And then she'd ask me, well, do you believe me that they're my children? And then we have other tools for dealing with that. We don't lie with this approach. I don't pretend I believe her, but I respect her truth. And I tell her I respect her truth, and I demonstrate that I respect her truth. And then I pivot and say, what can we work on together? Because you're in a lot of trouble right now, and there's nothing I can do to help you see Thad and the kids. This is a long answer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. You guys are great. And thank you, Norm and Judy.